The desert heat shimmered across the rocky terrain as Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez adjusted her scope for the third time in 10 minutes. Her hands were steady, but her mind raced with the weight of what lay ahead. The intelligence reports had been clear. A high-value target was moving through this remote mountain pass in Afghanistan. Accompanied by a convoy of heavily armed militants, Maria had earned her place among the elite Marine Corps snipers through years of rigorous training and proven performance in combat zones. At 28, she had already completed 2 tours in Iraq and was halfway through her deployment in Afghanistan. Her reputation for precision and calm under pressure had made her the first choice for this critical mission. The SEAL team. 6 operators had been tracking this particular terrorist cell for months. Their leader, known only as the Shadow, had been responsible for coordinating attacks that had claimed dozens of American lives. Today's operation was designed to end his reign of terror once and for all. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, the SEAL team leader, had briefed Maria personally. His weathered face showed the strain of countless missions, but his eyes held unwavering determination. "Rodriguez, we need this shot to count," he had told her. "Our intelligence suggests the Shadow will be in the lead vehicle. One clean shot and we can save countless lives." Maria had nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. She had taken difficult shots before, but never with stakes this high. The mission planners had positioned her on a ridge overlooking the mountain pass, giving her a clear line of sight to the anticipated route. 2 SEAL snipers, Petty Officers Thompson and Williams, were positioned on adjacent peaks as backup. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the valley below, Maria's radio crackled to life. "Overwatch, this is command. Target convoy spotted approximately 5 clicks out. ETA 15 minutes. Maria's pulse quickened slightly, but her breathing remained controlled. This was what she had trained for her entire military career. She had grown up in a small Texas town, where her father had taught her to hunt from a young age. Those early, morning trips to the deer blind had instilled in her a patience and focus that would prove invaluable in her military service. The convoy appeared as small dots on the dusty road below, growing larger with each passing minute. Through her scope, Maria could see 3 vehicles, a lead truck, a heavily armored SUV in the middle, and another truck bringing up the rear. Intel suggested the Shadow would be in the middle vehicle, surrounded by his most trusted bodyguards. "Overwatch, I have eyes on target convoy," Maria whispered into her radio. 3 vehicles, approximately 12 to 15 militants visible. "Copy that, Overwatch. You are cleared to engage on my mark," came the reply from Lieutenant Commander Morrison. Maria settled into her shooting position, her body becoming one with the rifle. The distance was challenging but well within her capabilities. She had made similar shots dozens of times in training and several times in actual combat. Her breathing slowed as she entered what snipers called the zone, that mental state where everything else faded away except the target and the shot. The convoy moved steadily along the predetermined route. Through her scope, Maria could see the occupants of the vehicles more clearly now. Armed men sat in the truck beds, their weapons at the ready. The middle vehicle's windows were tinted, making it impossible to identify specific individuals inside. "Wind is calm, visibility is good," she reported quietly. "Range approximately 800 meters and closing." The SEAL snipers on the adjacent peaks confirmed their positions. Thompson reported from the North Ridge. "I have a clear shot on the lead vehicle." Williams checked in from the south. "Rear vehicle in my sights." Everything was proceeding according to plan. The convoy would pass through a narrow section of the road where the vehicles would be forced to slow down, providing the perfect opportunity for simultaneous shots. Maria's target would be the middle vehicle, specifically aimed at the passenger area where intelligence suggested the Shadow would be seated. As the convoy entered the kill zone, Maria's world narrowed to the crosshairs in her scope. Years of training had prepared her for this moment. She controlled her breathing, her finger moving to the trigger with practiced precision. The middle vehicle was now perfectly positioned in her sight picture. "All units, prepare to engage on my count," came Morrison's voice through the radio. 3, 2, 1, Execute, execute, execute. Maria squeezed the trigger with smooth, steady pressure. The rifle's recoil was familiar and expected. Through her scope, she watched as her bullet struck the target vehicle's passenger compartment exactly where intended. Simultaneously, she heard the reports of the other snipers' rifles echoing across the valley. The lead vehicle swerved violently as Thompson's shot found its mark. The rear truck came to an abrupt halt as Williams engaged his targets. For a moment it appeared the mission was proceeding flawlessly. The convoy was in chaos, with vehicles stopping and militants jumping out in confusion. But something was wrong. Through her scope, Maria watched as armed figures began pouring out of all three vehicles in numbers far exceeding the initial intelligence estimates. Instead of the 12 to 15 militants they had expected, she counted at least 25. Heavily armed fighters taking defensive positions among the rocks and disabled vehicles. "Command, we have a problem," she reported urgently. "Enemy strength is significantly higher than anticipated. I count at least 25 hostiles, possibly more." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. The militants had not fled in panic as expected. Instead, they were organizing a coordinated response, taking cover and beginning to return fire toward the sniper positions. Muzzle flashes lit up the valley as automatic weapons opened up on the American positions. "All units maintain positions and continue engaging," Morrison ordered. "We need to neutralize as many hostiles as possible." Maria quickly cycled her bolt and acquired a new target. One of the militants was attempting to set up what appeared to be a heavy machine gun. She lined up her shot and fired, watching the man drop instantly. But for every enemy she eliminated, two more seemed to take his place. The radio chatter became increasingly frantic as the true scope of the situation became clear. This was not just a simple convoy escort for a high-value target. The Americans had walked into a carefully prepared trap, with far more enemy fighters than anyone had anticipated. As darkness began to fall across the valley, Maria realized that what had started as a precision strike mission was rapidly becoming a fight for survival. The enemy had superior numbers, knew the terrain, and seemed well prepared for exactly this type of engagement. The three American snipers would need to use every skill they possessed to survive the night ahead. The first hour of darkness brought a deadly game of cat and mouse. Maria pressed herself against the rocky outcropping, her rifle steady despite the chaos erupting around her position. The enemy fighters had spread out across the valley floor, using the disabled vehicles as cover while they systematically began searching for the American sniper positions. Through her night vision scope, Maria could see the militants moving with disturbing coordination. These were not the typical insurgents she had faced in previous engagements. Their movements were disciplined, their tactics sophisticated. Someone with military training was directing their response, and that someone had anticipated exactly this type of ambush. "Overwatch, this is Thompson," came the urgent whisper over her radio. "I've got at least 8 hostiles moving up the north ridge toward my position. They know where I am." Maria's blood ran cold. The enemy's ability to locate the sniper positions so quickly suggested they had been expected. The intelligence that had led to this mission was either fatally flawed or deliberately compromised. Either way, the 3 American snipers were now fighting for their lives against overwhelming odds. "Williams, report your status." Lieutenant Commander Morrison's voice cut through the radio chatter. "I count 12 hostiles approaching from the southwest," came Williams's tense reply. "They're using coordinated fire and movement tactics. These guys know what they're doing." Maria scanned her own sector and spotted the unmistakable signatures of at least 6 fighters climbing the ridge below her position. They moved in pairs, providing cover for each other as they advanced up the rocky slope. Professional soldiers would have been impressed by their discipline. The situation was becoming clear to Maria with each passing minute. The convoy had been bait, designed to draw American forces into a predetermined kill zone. The real trap was not the narrow mountain pass where the vehicles had been disabled, but the surrounding terrain that now crawled with enemy fighters. She keyed her radio quietly. "Command, this is Overwatch. We're looking at a sophisticated ambush. Enemy appears to have prior knowledge of our positions and tactics." "Copy that, Overwatch. Reinforcements are en route. but ETA is approximately 2 hours. You need to hold your positions and stay alive. Until then. 2 hours, Maria calculated quickly in her head. With the current rate of enemy advance and their superior numbers, the militants would overrun at least one of the sniper positions long before help arrived. The 3 Americans would need to disrupt the enemy's coordinated advance if they had any hope of survival. Through her scope, Maria identified what appeared to be a commander directing the assault on Thompson's position. The man was using hand signals to coordinate the movements of multiple fire teams. Taking him out might buy Thompson some time, but the shot would reveal her exact position to every enemy fighter in the valley. Maria made the decision without hesitation. She lined up her crosshairs on the enemy commander and squeezed the trigger. The man dropped instantly, and immediately the coordinated advance on Thompson's position faltered. The militants took cover, unsure of where the shot had originated. The victory was short-lived. Muzzle flashes erupted from multiple positions as the enemy fighters opened fire on Maria's ridge. Bullets cracked overhead and sparked off the rocks around her position. She rolled away from her primary firing position, seeking cover behind a larger boulder. "Nice shot, Rodriguez." Thompson's voice came through the radio. "You just bought me some breathing room." But Maria's situation was deteriorating rapidly. The enemy had triangulated her position from the muzzle flash, and she could see at least 10 fighters now climbing directly toward her. Their advance was methodical and professional, using every piece of available cover as they worked their way up the steep terrain. She grabbed her radio and tried to reach the SEAL team's command post. "Command, this is Overwatch. I need immediate fire support on my position. At least 10 hostiles climbing the East Ridge." Static filled her earpiece for several long seconds before Morrison's voice returned. "Overwatch, negative on fire support. We don't have assets in range. You need to relocate immediately." Maria's mind raced through her options. Moving from her current position would mean abandoning the high ground and the tactical advantage it provided. But staying meant being overrun by superior numbers within the next 30 minutes. Neither choice offered good odds of survival. She made a quick decision that would have surprised her instructors back at sniper school. Instead of retreating to a secondary position as doctrine dictated, Maria decided to advance. If the enemy expected her to fall back, she would do exactly the opposite. Slinging her rifle across her back, Maria pulled out her sidearm and began moving laterally along the ridge. The terrain was treacherous in the darkness, with loose rocks and steep drops, but it also provided concealment from the advancing fighters below. She moved with the skills learned from years of mountain warfare training, placing each step carefully to avoid dislodging rocks that would give away her position. As she moved, Maria could hear the enemy fighters calling to each other in multiple languages. Some spoke Arabic, others Pashto, and she caught fragments of what sounded like Chechen or possibly Russian. This was not a local insurgent group, but an international gathering of experienced fighters. The realization sent a chill down her spine. The Americans had not stumbled into a simple ambush, but had walked into what appeared to be a carefully orchestrated trap, involving foreign fighters with advanced military training. The implications for the broader war effort were staggering. Maria reached a position where she could observe the enemy advance without being seen. Through her night vision, she counted the fighters more carefully. Her earlier estimate had been conservative. There were at least 35 enemy combatants spread across the valley, with more possibly hidden in positions she could not observe. The odds were overwhelming, but Maria had not survived 3 combat deployments by accepting defeat. She began planning a series of hit-and-run attacks designed to disrupt the enemy's coordinated assault. If she could create enough confusion and eliminate key leaders, she might be able to buy time for Thompson and Williams to reposition. Her radio crackled with Williams's voice, strain evident in his tone. "I'm taking heavy fire from multiple directions. They've got me pinned down pretty good." "Thompson, can you provide covering fire for Williams?" Morrison asked over the radio. "Negative, Command. I've got my own problems up here. At least 12 hostiles within 100 meters of my position." Maria realized that the 3 American snipers were about to be overwhelmed individually. Their only chance of survival lay in somehow reuniting and fighting as a coordinated unit. But the enemy had positioned themselves to prevent exactly that kind of movement. Looking down at the valley floor, Maria could see the militants had established what appeared to be a command post near the disabled vehicles. Several fighters with radio equipment were directing the various assault teams climbing toward the American positions. If she could eliminate that command structure, the coordinated attack might collapse into individual uncoordinated assaults that would be easier to handle. The command post was over 1,000 meters away, at the extreme range of her rifles' effective capability. In daylight, with perfect conditions, it would be a challenging but achievable shot. In darkness, with enemy fighters actively hunting for her position, it was nearly impossible. Maria settled into a new firing position and began calculating the variables: distance, wind, elevation, target movement. She had one chance to make this shot count. If she missed, the muzzle flash would reveal her position to every enemy fighter in the valley, and her war would end very quickly. Through her scope, she could see 3 figures huddled around radio equipment near the largest disabled vehicle. One appeared to be issuing orders while the others relayed information to the various assault teams. Taking out all 3 with a single shot was impossible, but eliminating their communications might be enough to disrupt the coordinated attack. Maria took a deep breath and began her firing sequence. Everything she had learned about long-range, precision shooting would be tested in the next few seconds. The lives of 3 American warriors depended on her ability to make an impossible shot under the worst possible conditions. Maria's finger hovered over the trigger as she made final adjustments to her scope. The shot required perfect timing, perfect aim, and more than a little luck. Through her night vision, she could see the enemy commander gesturing animatedly while speaking into his radio. This was her moment. The rifle's report echoed across the valley like thunder. Maria watched through her scope as the enemy commander spun and collapsed. His radio equipment scattered across the rocky ground. The other figures around the command post dove for cover, shouting in confusion. Almost immediately, the coordinated nature of the enemy assault began to break down. The various teams climbing toward the American positions slowed their advance, apparently waiting for new orders that would not come. Maria had bought precious time, but she had also revealed her position to every enemy fighter in the valley. Muzzle flashes erupted from multiple locations as the militants opened fire on her ridge. Bullets whined overhead and sparked off rocks all around her position. Maria rolled away from her firing spot just as a burst of automatic gunfire chewed up the ground where she had been lying seconds before. "Outstanding shot, Overwatch." Thompson's voice came through her radio. "The pressure on my position just decreased significantly." But Maria's situation was now critical. She could see at least 15 enemy fighters converging on her position from 3 different directions. They were moving fast, abandoning the cautious advance they had used earlier in favor of an overwhelming assault designed to overrun her before she could relocate. She slung her rifle and drew her pistol, knowing that close-quarters combat was now inevitable. Her years of training had prepared her for this possibility, but facing 15 enemy fighters with only a sidearm and limited ammunition was a daunting prospect, even for an experienced Marine. The first enemy fighters reached her ridge within minutes. Maria could hear them calling to each other in Arabic, coordinating their final assault. They were being methodical, searching every possible hiding spot as they closed in on her position. Maria pressed herself against a rock formation, trying to become invisible in the darkness. Through the gap between 2 boulders, she could see 3 fighters moving directly toward her hiding spot. Their weapons were raised and ready, night vision goggles giving them a significant advantage in the darkness. When the lead fighter was less than 10 meters away, Maria made her move. She rolled out from behind the rocks and fired 3 quick shots. The first fighter dropped instantly, but the other 2 dove for cover and began returning fire. Bullets cracked past Maria's head as she scrambled for a new position. The sound of gunfire from her location attracted more enemy fighters. Maria could hear boots on rock as additional militants climbed up to join the assault. She was being surrounded, with her ammunition running low and no way to retreat from the ridge. "Command, this is Overwatch," she whispered into her radio. "I'm in close contact with multiple hostiles. Situation is critical." Morrison's voice came back immediately. "Overwatch, can you break contact and move to an alternate position?" Maria looked around at the enemy fighters closing in from all directions. Negative, Command, I'm surrounded. Going to need a miracle to get out of this one. As if in response to her words, the sound of helicopter rotors echoed across the valley. Maria's heart jumped with hope, but the sound was coming from the wrong direction. Through her night vision, she could see a helicopter approaching from the south, but it was not an American aircraft. The helicopter settled into a landing zone near the disabled convoy, and armed figures began jumping out. Maria counted at least 12 additional enemy fighters, heavily armed and equipped with what appeared to be advanced military gear. The trap that had been set for the American forces was even more sophisticated than she had realized. Command, be advised, Maria radioed urgently. Enemy helicopter just delivered approximately 12 additional fighters to the valley floor. This is a major operation, not a simple ambush. The arrival of reinforcements seemed to energize the enemy fighters on Maria's ridge. Their advance became more aggressive, with covering fire being provided from multiple positions. Maria realized she had perhaps minutes before being overrun. She made a decision that would have seemed insane to any rational observer. Instead of trying to hide or retreat, Maria decided to attack. If she was going to die on this ridge, she would take as many enemy fighters with her as possible. Moving with the speed and aggression that had made her one of the Marine Corps' most effective snipers, Maria burst from her hiding spot and charged directly toward the nearest group of enemy fighters. The element of surprise gave her a crucial advantage in the first few seconds of contact. Her pistol barked repeatedly as she engaged targets at close range. The first fighter went down before he could raise his weapon. The second managed to get off a wild burst that went high, before Maria's return fire dropped him as well. The third fighter in the group had better reflexes and dove behind a boulder, but not before taking a round in the shoulder. Maria's aggressive assault had disrupted the coordinated enemy advance, but it had also put her in an exposed position, with multiple threats closing in from all sides. She dove behind a rocky outcropping just as automatic weapons fire erupted from 3 different directions. The radio crackled with Williams's voice, strain and desperation clear in his tone. Command, I'm being overrun. I count at least 20 hostiles within 50 meters of my position. Thompson, can you provide assistance to Williams? Morrison asked over the radio. Negative, Command. I've got my own problems up here. Taking heavy fire from multiple directions. Maria realized that all 3 American snipers were simultaneously under assault by overwhelming numbers. The enemy had timed their final coordinated attack perfectly, ensuring that none of the Americans could provide mutual support. Through the chaos of gunfire and shouting, Maria heard something that made her blood run cold. One of the enemy fighters was speaking English with what sounded like an American accent. The implications were staggering. Either they were facing an American traitor, or the enemy had access to someone with intimate knowledge of American military tactics and procedures. The sound of that American voice explaining sniper doctrine to the enemy fighters filled Maria with a cold rage that cut through her fear. Someone had betrayed not just this mission, but potentially countless American lives. The knowledge that she might be fighting against a fellow American made her more determined than ever to survive and expose the traitor. Maria checked her ammunition and found she had only 8 rounds remaining in her pistol and no spare magazines. Against at least 10 enemy fighters still closing on her position, those 8 rounds would have to count for everything. The enemy fighters were now so close that she could hear their individual conversations. They were discussing how to take her alive, apparently having received orders to capture rather than kill the American sniper. This gave Maria a slight tactical advantage, as they would be more cautious in their final assault. Through her night vision, she could see the enemy fighters positioning themselves for the final rush on her position. In another minute or 2, they would coordinate a simultaneous assault from multiple directions that would be impossible to repel. With her limited ammunition, Maria keyed her radio one final time. Command, this is Overwatch. Tell my family I love them. I'm going to hold this position as long as possible. Morrison's voice came back immediately. Overwatch, negative on that talk. Keep fighting. Help is on the way. But Maria knew that help would not arrive in time. The enemy fighters were already beginning their final assault, moving from cover to cover as they closed the distance to her position. She had perhaps 30 seconds before the shooting would begin in earnest. Maria said, a quick prayer, and checked her weapon one final time. 8 rounds against 10 enemy fighters. In her mind, she could hear her old drill instructor's voice from boot camp. 1 shot, 1 kill, Marine. Make every round count. The sound of boots on rock was getting closer. Maria gripped her pistol and prepared for the fight of her life. The first enemy fighter rounded the boulder with his rifle raised, expecting to find Maria cowering behind the rocks. Instead, he found himself staring down the barrel of her pistol from less than 5 feet away. Maria's first shot caught him, sent her mass, dropping him instantly before he could cry out a warning. She immediately rolled to her left, knowing that the fallen fighter's companions would be seconds behind him. Her movement saved her life as automatic weapons fire erupted. From the position she had just vacated, rock fragments exploded around her as bullets struck the boulder where her head had been. Moments before, Maria counted muzzle flashes and estimated at least 4 enemy fighters in her immediate vicinity, with more approaching from other directions. Her tactical situation was hopeless by any conventional measure. But Maria had not survived 3 combat tours by accepting conventional limitations. Moving with the fluid aggression of a predator, she used the rocky terrain to her advantage. Every boulder, every crevice became part of her defensive strategy. When 2 fighters tried to flank her from the right, she was waiting behind an outcropping with her pistol ready. 2 quick shots dropped both men before they realized their mistake. The sound of her gunfire brought more enemy fighters rushing toward her position. Maria could hear them calling to each other in Arabic and English, trying to coordinate their assault. The American voice was still directing tactics, giving her opponents a significant advantage in their knowledge of how she might react to their movements. She's behind the large boulder cluster, the American voice called out. Jenkins, take your team around the left side. Hassan, move your men to the right. We'll pin her down with covering fire and close from 3 directions. Maria's blood boiled as she heard tactical call signs being used by the enemy. This was definitely a trained American military member working with the militants. The betrayal cut deeper than the physical danger she was facing. She had 5 rounds remaining when the coordinated assault began. Automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions, forcing her to keep her head down while enemy fighters moved to surround her. The covering fire was accurate and sustained, showing professional military discipline. Through a gap in the rocks, Maria caught a glimpse of movement to her left. A fighter was trying to work his way around her position while staying low to avoid her return fire. She waited until he committed to crossing an open space between 2 boulders, then put a round center mass that dropped him instantly. 4 rounds left. At least 6 enemy fighters still active in her immediate area. The American voice was getting closer, apparently leading one of the assault teams personally. Tighten the noose, he called out. She can't have much ammunition left. We need her, alive for interrogation. Maria realized that being taken alive would mean revealing sensitive information about American military operations under torture. That was simply not an option. She would fight until her last round, then save the final bullet for herself if necessary. The enemy fighters were now close enough that she could hear their individual breathing. They were moving with extreme caution, knowing that she was still armed and extremely dangerous despite being outnumbered. Their hesitation gave her a brief tactical advantage. When the next fighter showed himself, Maria was ready. Her shot took him down, but his death cry alerted the remaining fighters to her exact position. Immediately, sustained automatic weapons fire began chewing up the rocks around her hiding spot. 3 rounds remaining. At least 5 enemy fighters still in the fight. The American voice was now close enough that Maria could almost make out his face in her night vision. Cease fire! Cease fire! He shouted. We need to take her alive. Switch to non-lethal if possible. The automatic weapons fire stopped, replaced by the sound of equipment being adjusted. Maria realized they were preparing to use stun grenades or other less lethal weapons to incapacitate her. She had perhaps seconds before being overwhelmed. Maria made a decision that would define the rest of the engagement. Instead of waiting for the enemy to come to her, she launched herself from behind her defensive position in a desperate offensive maneuver. Her sudden appearance caught the nearest fighter completely off guard. Her shot took him down at point-blank range, but the muzzle flash revealed her position to every remaining enemy fighter. She dove behind another boulder as gunfire erupted from multiple directions, fragments of rock stinging her face and arms. 2 rounds left. 4 confirmed enemy fighters still active, possibly more. The American trader's voice carried clearly across the rocky terrain. "Rodriguez, I know you can hear me. Maria Rodriguez, Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps. We know who you are." The sound of her name from an enemy position sent ice through Maria's veins. This was not just operational intelligence but personal information that could only have come from someone with access to classified military personnel files. "Your position is hopeless, Sergeant Rodriguez," the voice continued. "Surrender now and you'll be treated according to the Geneva Convention. Continue fighting and you'll force us to kill you." Maria's response was to put a bullet through the radio equipment she could see positioned behind a nearby rock. The shot was perfect, destroying the enemy's communications gear and buying her teammates some additional time. 1 round left. At least 4 enemy fighters still active, and they were closing in for the final assault. The end came faster than Maria had expected. 3 fighters rushed her position simultaneously from different angles, while a 4th provided covering fire. Her final round took down the lead attacker, but the other 2 reached her position before she could reload. The hand-to-hand combat that followed was brutal and desperate. Maria's military combatives training gave her an advantage against opponents who expected her to surrender, but she was fighting multiple attackers while armed only with her knife and her determination to never be taken alive. The first fighter to reach her made the mistake of trying to tackle her instead of simply shooting. Maria's knife found his throat before he could bring his weapon to bear. But the second fighter had learned from his companion's mistake and kept his distance while trying to line up a non-lethal shot. Maria, dive toward the second fighter saved her life as a stun grenade detonated where she had been standing seconds before. The blast was close enough to disorient her, but she maintained enough situational awareness to drive her knife into the second fighter's chest before he could recover from his surprise at her aggressive response. But the third fighter had positioned himself perfectly, and as Maria struggled to regain her bearings from the stun grenade, she felt the sharp pain of a taser's electrodes finding their mark. Her muscles locked up involuntarily as electricity coursed through her body. As consciousness faded, Maria could hear the American trader's voice giving orders to secure her weapons and equipment. Her last coherent thought was a promise to herself that she would survive whatever interrogation awaited her and somehow escape to expose the betrayal that had cost so many American lives. The darkness that claimed her was filled with the sound of approaching helicopter rotors. Whether they were American or enemy aircraft, Maria could no longer tell. Her war was entering a new and far more dangerous phase, one where the enemies wore familiar uniforms and spoke with American accents. But Maria Rodriguez was far from defeated. The same determination that had made her one of the Marine Corps' most effective snipers would serve her well in the trials ahead. The enemy had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Her teammates Thompson and Williams were still alive and fighting somewhere in the darkness. Help was still coming, even if it might arrive too late for her, and somewhere among the enemy fighters was an American traitor who would pay for his betrayal if Maria had anything to say about it. The unconscious Marine was carried toward the waiting helicopter, but her captors had no idea what they had truly captured. They thought they had taken a defeated soldier. In reality, they had just awakened a force of nature that would stop at nothing to complete her mission and protect her fellow Americans. Maria's consciousness returned gradually, filtering through layers of pain and disorientation. The steady throb of helicopter rotors filled her ears, and the chemical taste of the sedatives they had used lingered in her mouth. Her hands were zip-tied behind her back and a black hood covered her head, cutting off her vision. Through the fabric, she could hear voices speaking in multiple languages. Arabic, Pashto, and English mixed together as her captors discussed their next moves. The American voice she had heard earlier was giving orders, his tone carrying the authority of someone in command. "The extraction point is 15 minutes out," the American voice said. "Once we reach the safe house, we'll begin the interrogation. She's got information about SEAL team operations that could be invaluable to our cause. Maria forced herself to remain still and appear unconscious while her tactical mind began working through the situation. She had been captured alive, which meant they needed her for information. That gave her some leverage. But it also meant they would use every method available to break her resistance. Her training at SEAR School, survival, evasion, resistance, escape, had prepared her for exactly this scenario. The instructors had been clear. Captured soldiers had a duty to resist interrogation, escape if possible, and continue the mission by any means necessary. The helicopter began to descend, and Maria could feel the change in altitude through her inner ear. They were approaching their destination, and once on the ground, her options for escape would become much more limited. If she was going to act, it would have to be soon. Through the hood, Maria tried to gather intelligence about her captors and their numbers. She counted at least 4 distinct voices in the immediate area, plus the pilot and possibly a co-pilot. The zip ties on her wrists were tight, but not impossibly so. With some work, she might be able to slip them. The helicopter touched down with a gentle bump, and Maria heard the rotors beginning to wind down. Hands grabbed her arms, hauling her to her feet and guiding her toward what she assumed was the aircraft's door. The night air hit her skin as they moved her outside. "Careful with her," the American voice ordered. "She's already killed 8 of our people. Don't give her any opportunities." 8 kills. Maria felt a grim satisfaction despite her circumstances. Even outnumbered and outgunned, she had made the enemy pay dearly for their victory. That was something her Marine Corps training could be proud of. They walked her across what felt like rough ground for several minutes before reaching what seemed to be a building. Maria heard the sound of a heavy door opening, then felt herself being pushed down a flight of stairs. The temperature dropped noticeably, suggesting they were moving underground. When they finally removed her hood, Maria found herself in what appeared to be a basement or bunker. The walls were concrete, the lighting harsh and artificial. 3 armed men stood around her, their faces partially concealed by tactical gear. But the 4th figure, the one she had been hearing give orders, stood directly in front of her with his face clearly visible. Maria, "S blood turned to ice as she recognized him. Master Sergeant David Kowalski, United States Army Special Forces. She had met him briefly during a joint training exercise 2 years ago. His reputation as an experienced and dedicated soldier had been impeccable. Seeing him here, clearly in command of enemy forces, was like a physical blow. "Hello, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," Kowalski said with a smile that held no warmth. "I'm sorry about the rough treatment, but you have quite a reputation for being dangerous. We couldn't take any chances." "You're a traitor," Maria said,